Yellow.
Hey Seth, how are you?
Hey, Kenny, just so you know, we are streaming live right now on YouTube as we're getting started. Just the way the format works. And you can't see me yet. You will in a second. That's part of the intro. Um, but I guess I
Great.
don't know. Hold on. Let me test something. No.
Yeah, I
Okay.
can hear you.
Okay. But I can't hear you back. So whatever. All right. That's just the thing. Me playing with my toys, really. Um,
Okay.
so if you're ready to get started, let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it should be good.
All right. Let me grab my water. And I got a little intro tune and we'll rock and roll.
All right, let's do it.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Almost Agreement. We are live on YouTube. For those that are watching us there, this will also be formatted into our podcast for our podcast listeners, so it'll be distributed shortly through all the podcast providers. We're Almost in Agreement, almostinagreement@gmail.com. We are on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. You can go to our website, almostinagreement.com. You can get all the episodes there, or you can go to your favorite podcast provider and get them there as well. Give us a like, share, friend, follow, subscribe, whatever the thing is that helps us, get all our episodes to you quicker. Today I've got Kenny Zhu. He's from he's written a book recently called The Inconvenient Minority. As you guys know, we've had a little bit of CRT conversation, and he was a suggestion through the Speak group on somebody to talk to about some of the different effects of what critical race theory is doing across the board. So we'll talk about that among other things. As you guys know, we are promoting the Fourth Creek Brewers Fest. It is July 10th at 2 p.m. Go to evapeloungeknox.com/beerfest to learn more about that. It's a good, fun way to get to know your very local breweries, because we are a very local podcast. So without anything else, this is Kenny, everybody. We're gonna chat. All right, Kenny, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Seth.
There's me and my big, beautiful beard. Okay.
Lovely.
All right, so let's just do a little, a little biography background on you to how to kind of set the scene on why we're even talking today.
Yeah, I got connected with you through our mutual friend Taylor. But I'm just finishing up the publicity process for my new book, An Inconvenient Minority: The Attack on Asian American Excellence and the Fight for Meritocracy. As many of your listeners know, we have a critical race theory ideology
Pardon the dog,
that
sorry.
says if you're a minority, you're a victim. Uh, and it's not true. But it's especially not true for Asian Americans, who actually have been discriminated against in this country, but they still become more successful academically than even white Americans in this country. How could this be the case? How could it be the case? And now you have Harvard discriminating against minorities, including Asian Americans, to make room for other minorities. So you're witnessing the implosion of critical race theory ideology, because they try to say that Black Americans are kept down because of racism. But then why isn't racism keeping these other minorities down? What's happening? What's going on? My book investigates all of those facets going on in our culture today.
Okay, we'll come back around to that, because I certainly want to know that. And so, what I mean, like as your bio has, as I was doing some research on you, as now I forgot the terms I used. A journalist, which I joke, and I don't like to call myself a journalist. I'm not that qualified to do the job, but I'm a curious constituent is kind of a better way that I like to put it. So like, what was the kickstart for what was it to you that I mean, obviously that Harvard case was a big one, but I get the feeling that some of this outlook for you started before that. What was it that got you into kind of looking critically at things like critical race theory and some of the different aspects that are going on to be vocal about calling foul and on the situation?
When I was a kid, my parents, they immigrated from China. And when I was a kid in high school, they always taught me the value of hard work. And then, you saw kids who gave the right victim story in class and the right sob story, and they would get all of these privileges. Their teachers would treat them nicer, they whine, their teachers would treat them better. They would get into colleges because they wrote Black Lives Matter on their college applications. They now with jobs and things, people will get jobs based on their race, based on their race. I mean, people are being elevated now in corporations like Facebook and Google based on their race, based on what they look like, not based on how they perform. And I got very angry at that because I work so hard. My friends work so hard. My Asian American friends would study twice as much as the average person. And that's, by the way, a statistical fact. Asian Americans do study twice as many hours as the average American. And it's when you lose that principle of treating people based on merit, then I think you see cultural decline.
And I tend to agree with that. I think merit is important. So, what do you account for that difference in the Asian culture versus the white American culture or the African American culture or some of the other different kind of subgroupings that we do have? How do you account for that statistic? Like, I mean, as you said, it's statistically proven. What do you account for that difference within the Asian American community?
Hard work, strong family. I mean, as I've told you before, Asian Americans study twice as many hours as the average American. These Asian immigrants come here with basically nothing. They don't have privileges. They don't have money. They come here and they study, and they focus really hard on their education. And education is available anywhere in this country for anybody who tries. For anybody who actually wants to get an education, they can get an education. There's so many textbooks, online services, teachers, places you can do it. So there really isn't much of an excuse to not get an education, unless you're in just horrible circumstances,
Right.
Severely impoverished circumstances. But even impoverished Asian Americans still teach their kids to study hard, and they use what little savings they have to put their kids into school and after school programs so they can do that. So that is a big value among Asian Americans. I think that helps them to achieve academically.
Because I do agree with you. I think that there is, in my experience of the different Asian families that I've had the pleasure of coming in contact with, it is culturally a much stronger family-oriented subset, for lack of a better word. That there is kind of the hierarchy of the family. The dad runs the show kind of stuff, and there's the push that goes along with that. And I think that's something that is a cultural issue in America as a whole. Is I think we do have this kind of I won't say anti-family stance, but it's certainly. There are benefits, especially among the lower classes of people. There are benefits to being single with kids. There's benefits to having that low income and not having the full family structure. There's a story, I think it was out of Texas, of a couple who was very much in love. They loved each other very much. They were just down on their luck kind of thing. Didn't have a lot of money. Had 2 kids, and they were in a welfare or food stamps office talking to something. And the lady that was helping them try to figure out the different things that were available to them says, "You could do a lot better if you divorced your husband." And it's like, well, what kind of system are we in place where we're trying to break up a family as a positive?
Wow.
That's one of those, and that's not a unique story. I've heard a number of different versions of that in some way, shape, or form. That it is a bonus in American, at least in the lower class portion, it's a bonus to be having kids out of wedlock or to get divorced, and you get more money for it from different government assistance programs, and that's a terrible incentive, especially for things like raising well-rounded, the value of education, all the different things like that. And so again, okay, so to get back to the point, the point for me with when I started this whole discussion that Taylor was a part of was here in Tennessee, we put in this first session in our state Senate or state house, I can't remember who initiated the bill, but they have their matching versions, put in at least in the rhetoric version of it, an anti-critical race theory in public schools bill. So the verbiage of the bill is a little rough, and there's some other things about that. But I guess to me, what I'm trying to understand is why this is such a big conversation. After having this discussion in the Facebook group and reaching out and trying to understand, that's how I got introduced to you. And I also talked to Gloria Johnson. She's one of our reps here, state reps here locally. And as well as speaking to a couple of teachers and stuff like that. My understanding is that we're not teaching any critical race theory in the K through 12 system anyway. So the question to me is there some assumption that it's coming down through some of the higher education, through some of the teachers that have gone and gotten their masters that are coming into the classroom and maybe not teaching it as critical race theory, but teaching some of the ideology from it in the classroom, and that is what the concern is. That's what I'm still trying to figure out. Like, I guess my problem is I don't understand how it applies, and I'm trying to figure that part out. I don't know how much you've followed the state level stories, but I mean, are you familiar with anything that moves that direction, where we have, you know, a sixth grade teacher, for lack of a better word, teaching American history that's using a critical race theory kind of format in the classroom?
Well, in private schools, it's a huge thing right now. And you're also right. Uh, in I would say in a district like Tennessee, or Eastern Tennessee, more traditionally conservative, you probably don't see as much of this teaching. But in Loudoun County, Virginia, Northern Virginia, very liberal. You have huge protests erupting over the teaching of critical race theory in the public schools because um, you have this curriculum, and look, America isn't perfect. It's not perfect, but critical race theory isn't about providing a nuanced vision of American history. Critical race theory this is actually the definition of critical race theory. By the way, if your listeners just don't know what critical race theory is, this is the definition of critical race theory. Critical race theory examines how our laws and structures of society contain race, even when they're not explicitly saying it. So critical race theorists see race in everything. They see race in colorblind laws. They see race in different. They see racism in the fact that Asian Americans score the highest on the SAT, and then white Americans, and then Latino Americans, and then Black Americans. They think the SAT is racist, basically, is what they're saying. And this is critical race theory. This is why it's wrong. Because no, it's not because of racism that Asian Americans score the highest of the SAT. It's actually because they study harder.
Right. I mean, I don't remember mine. It's been a long time, but I don't remember a question about like the capital of some province in the middle of China that I don't know exists being a question on it. That's what I again, and these are kind of some of the themes I've heard. And so I guess the question is, what is the argument for are there examples of how the SAT is racist, or is it just that just because one race does better at it means it's skewed for that race's benefit?
No,
because that's one of the things to me that's confusing is that a disparate outcome somehow means it was built to that. And I don't know that I could see that being the case in some occasions, but if that's the argument, if the argument is that the SAT is pro-Asian American, then let's examine what is making it so, but that doesn't seem to be the conversation.
Well, it's not the SAT was pro-Asian American. The SAT was actually designed to prevent discrimination. I think that's the point of the SAT. In fact, Black students used to do I take that back. The SAT was designed to prevent discrimination. That's why it was made. It's because in other cases, it usually was the white privileged kids who would get into all of these universities and colleges. But the SAT made it available for a poor kid to say, actually, I'm competing on the same standard of intelligence that you are.
Right.
So you should admit me over the white rich kid. So it's actually anti-racist.
Right. It quantify
for that word.
It's an attempt to quantify an educational level, so that when you're looking at an application, you can cover up the demographics of that person, and it's like here's their GPA from school, here are their SAT scores. It doesn't. That was my understanding of it as well, is that it's meant to quantify something so that we actually have a number to say, I don't remember. I always get them mixed up, SAT, ACT, which one scores which way, but like a 1600 is really good. It doesn't matter, we don't care what race you are. It's a 1600 on your SAT or ACT. Again, I don't remember which one scores which way, but it was like a 27 and a 1600 or something like that. It's a good score.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So who cares? Who cares what the name and the race of the person is? They scored at the level that we require.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So again, one of the things that as I've been explained to me, and that I'm trying to understand, is how we got out of the original of critical race theory, which is examining which was more of a legal conversation as far as that, into the historical reference and how this is changing how we're looking at history.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any more to speak on that?
Yeah. Well, I wrote an article about this in the Federalist called "Critical Race Theory's Poisonous Roots Trace Back to Harvard University." Harvard University is the progenitor of critical race theory. It started from critical legal studies, which investigates it in law, which you talked about. Then it was disseminated from Harvard Law School into all of these other schools. Education is very top down. So when Harvard says something, other people listen. Then it goes from there into the teaching colleges. Then it goes from the teaching colleges into the K-12. And this is what you're seeing in K-12. This is where it's come from. It comes directly from critical race instruction, in the 80s, the 90s, and early 2000s. It's basically been a 30-year delay since critical race theory really originated as a concept in Harvard Law School to the point where it's now disseminated in K-12 universities. And the 1619 Project is a direct invocation of critical race theory into the American mainstream. That's
so just
how you should think about
a quick non sequitur. Didn't she get offered a job at like UNC, one of the North Carolina schools?
Yeah,
and
yesterday.
She refused it because she didn't get immediate tenure or something like that.
Well, they gave her tenure. They relented. They gave her tenure.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Yesterday.
The last I saw was that she was not going to do it if she didn't get tenure from day one. Anyway, non sequitur. Yeah. As you were, I apologize for interrupting. But so the 1619 Project is the social historical offspring of the original critical race theory, as far as legally speaking. That's kind of where you were going. I was trying to get us back on track. I apologize. I'm bad at interrupting. It's just how I do.
Yeah, no worries. It's not the originator. It's like it's a magnification. It's a popularizer of critical race theory. I would describe Nicole Hannah-Jones, who authored the 1619 Project. She's not an intellectual. She's a popularizer. That's what it is. The 1619 Project is like a People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. Do you know that book?
I haven't read it, but I'm aware of it, yes.
The People's History of the United States is a textbook that has appeared in some schools, in some high schools, where it teaches the history of the United States from like a populist working class point of view against the rich elites. And the 1619 Project is like a textbook of American history that teaches it, except the lens of oppression is through race.
Okay.
As in America, the history of the United States needs to be investigated through the lens of racism. That's what the 1619 Project is. So it's a popularizer of critical race theory.
Okay. And then, I guess that is where the jump into now this has become the popular history. This is being taught by educators who went through the higher levels of education and learned this version. I don't mean to say it that way, but they've learned history through this lens, and now they are teaching it in K through 12 through the lens that they were taught it as college students themselves. And that's the I guess the path of why this is a discussion for allowing it or disallowing it in the K through 12 system, and the different states are arguing about it and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Again, see, like, okay, for we talked in the emails about kind of my local focus. That's what we do. I mean, we've been around for a little over a year now. We have a decent following, that kind of stuff. But for backstory for you, it's like I jokingly call myself a comfortable idiot. Like I'm comfortable and I don't understand things. Like I just don't understand. Like I watch the news. I'm trying to follow stuff. I was a guy that didn't pay attention for most of my adult life. And it's like me and my buddies would argue about how important local politics are, and we don't know who any of our local politicians are. And so I started this deep dive into it. And so, as these different stories blow up on my local news, I don't understand them. I don't understand the parts and pieces. This is, like between you and some other people trying to explain what critical race theory is, how it's supposed to work, that kind of thing. And so like I joke all the time as being a comfortable idiot is that I'm dumb enough and comfortable enough with myself that I'll ask the question, because I think a lot of people aren't willing to ask the question from a I don't know better lens. And I think there's a lot of I think that's one of the issues with the media in general is there's an assumption that people have an understanding. And then there's such tiny windows in regular news, and when they talk about stuff that people that don't have a good understanding don't get a chance to really wrap their heads around it. And so it's like, all right, well, I'll take that. I'll take the chance of looking like a fool. I don't mind in trying to understand how we got to this discussion. And so that's, I appreciate that part of what we've done so far. And so I guess looking forward, it's because the big argument opposite is that no, there is no critical race theory being taught in K through 12 in the state of Tennessee right now. That's what I'm being told.
Who's telling you that?
I mean, this is what Gloria Johnson, the rep I talked to earlier, a number of people in the chat that because okay, so again, another little bit of context for you is this. The group is called Speak. It's a Facebook group here in Knoxville that is students, parents, educators. Around Knoxville or something like that is the group, and it's a lot of parents and stuff. Then we're talking about different things that are going on, and it was a way I got into it as a way for me to try to keep up and understand these different things. And so there's been a lot of talk in the news about this critical race theory thing in schools, and I didn't understand it, and so I put a post out to the group that says, hey, I'd love to have some people on the show to try to explain to me what's going on here and why this, that, and the other. And so, again, Taylor recommended you. A couple other people recommended a number of other people. One of them was Gloria Johnson, who came in here and told me. But inside that same thing, I had a number of people who was like, no, critical race theory is not being taught in Tennessee K through 12. And so, again, this is my concern here is this is a semantics thing. So, yes, critical race theory as the legal, the original legal version is not being taught because you don't teach legal classes in K through 12 anyway. But as far as the evolving history or the way we are evolving to look at history in the United States, I guess is what's at question here. Is that the 1619 project kind of popularized version of American history is, I guess, what's in concern. And so that's again where I'm confused. So I mean, again, you asked that question, it sounds like you have pushback on that. So do you understand that they are teaching some sort of critical race theory in K through 12?
Well, do they teach race in Tennessee, or like civil rights and that kind of thing?
I'm trying to think back to my history. My kids aren't old enough that I haven't been through. I mean, we did some Civil War stuff this year with my fourth grader, and I'd have to talk to him a little bit further about exactly what some of the stuff that was going on in that segment of class.
Talk to your kid. See what he says about what the teacher's saying about race.
Okay,
By the way, teaching about race in America and racism is not necessarily teaching critical race theory, but if your kid starts coming back home from school saying something like, wow, I can't believe I'm so privileged because I'm white. Or if your kid comes and says something like, wow, I didn't know I was racist against black people. That's critical race theory. That's critical race.
Because I agree. That's one of the things and again, this is me trying to sort through the rhetoric and the reality. Because that is something as a parent that I don't want taught. The privilege part, I can kind of understand parts and pieces of it, but that's way too nuanced of a conversation for a teacher to have with my kid. That's something that I'll talk to him about when I feel the time is appropriate. But
well, tell a coal miner's daughter that her father was privileged because he's white.
Right, I follow what you're saying. I mean, I've always, like, my pushback has always been it's an income privilege, not a color privilege.
Yeah, but it's also a privilege of living in America.
Okay.
Because, people like to trash on America and say there's so little opportunity here. There's more opportunity here than there is in the entire world. Like, if you go to, I don't know, Poland, and you're born in a certain social class, you stay in that social class. Like, you ain't getting out of that social class. Like Greeks, why do so many Greek people come to America? Because the entrepreneurial Greek people can't make it or don't want to try to make it in Greece because it's basically a socialist welfare state. So they come to America and then they become rich.
All right.
Because again, this is a country where you can move out of your income bracket,
right?
Unlike in other countries,
right? And that is a good base argument of why do we have a southern border problem? Why are so many people flocking here? Kind of conversation for sure. All right. I mean, again, like I said, this is me just exploring because I don't know any better, and I'm happy to hear point of views from any and all comers. So again, like I will follow up on that, and I will try to talk my kid into doing a show with me just so we can talk about his Civil War classes. Because like I don't know, I used to be a lot stronger on the not buying the privilege part of the conversation. but again, like I said, I think it's more of a it's more of a class than a race issue at play, and the history. Some of the true history has put some races in a more compromised position class wise over time, and it's trying to dig that out. And I guess my issue is I don't know how to fix it. Let's okay, so here in Knoxville, another good topic that we've been talking about is we had a significant amount of redlining back in the 40s, 50s, whatever exactly it was. And to me, one of the greatest wealth builders in any family is home ownership. And when the government wants to take your home away and build some municipal complex there and doesn't pay you for it and just kicks you out of your home, that's a problem. And it's going to take generations to get out of that hole. But I don't know that this is what fixed it. I don't know that I agree that a critical race theory, looking at the racist past of America kind of thing, is a solution. And so, how do we get out of some of the racial issues we're having?
Okay. Well, let's circle back.
Okay.
Jen Psaki. What is redlining?
um, Essentially, my understanding of it here is there was a good portion of town that was where most of the black community of the time lived, and they were basically evicted by the city for some projects. I don't know the full history of it. I know a chunk of it was where the interstate went through when the Eisenhower project kicked in, and some of that kind of stuff. And so there was just displacement, for lack of a better word, that was at the time very significantly racially motivated.
Okay, I think you're talking about eminent domain. Eminent domain is when the government takes your land and then builds stuff over it, usually like a highway or something, because
Right.
there's no other place to build a highway. So that's a political issue. That's a genuine political issue. It happens to white communities as well, though, not just black communities. It also happens to Asian communities too. So that's the power we give the local government to use eminent domain, because what if 100,000 people need a highway and there are 3 people who are stopping them from building a highway? What are we going to do? So but redlining is when the government purposefully refuses or devalues a place of property where the credit is where it otherwise wouldn't be devalued.
Gotcha. And again,
so
to be fair to the conversation, I'm not sure that I know the history of it well enough to be quoted correctly. So it could be more of that situation, and I'm just picking up the parts and pieces of it. Like I said, comfortable idiot.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I'm just saying, when people would use the words like redlining, you know, not lending to people because they have low credit scores is not redlining. Okay? It's not. If you have a 400 credit score, nobody should be lending to you for a mortgage for a house. It's just bad. And unfortunately, disproportionately, black Americans have lower credit scores than white Americans. Like, we just know that. And you can talk about all of the causes for why that's the case, but we should not be lending mortgages to people with 400 credit scores. And by the way, a lot of white Americans have 400 credit scores too. And even some Asian Americans, guess what, have 400 credit scores. So it's not a race thing. People are trying to make this into a race thing, where it's actually deeper than race. It's about behavior, it's about culture, it's about policy.
Okay. Well, let's start with behavior. Go there. Let's talk about behaviors that got us to where we are.
So student debt is one thing. You take out, a $50,000-$60,000 loan for college, and then you spend 4 years of college partying, and then you don't work or you don't pay back that loan in time, and then your loan interest increases and it lowers your credit score. And that's the reason why you have a 400 credit score or a 500 FICO credit score when you should be having closer to a 700 or an 800. When you get into debt, when you spend, when you max out credit cards, although that doesn't tend to happen as much, it's mostly getting into big debt, like student debt, that really causes your credit score to come out. Or you take a big car loan that you can't afford. That's when your credit score goes down. It has nothing to do with your race. It has nothing to do with the fact that you're black or you're white. It just has to do with your spending habits. It's an algorithm, that's behavior. That's behavior issues. Or it's a policy issue, depending on the way you look at it. Maybe you're looking at it and you're like, well, colleges shouldn't charge that much. But if colleges shouldn't charge that much, then why did you take it? Then why did you take that loan to get into college if you think they were charging too much? So you have to, these are tough questions to answer.
Okay.
Another thing you should know about black women. Another thing you should know about black women is that black women tend to have behaviors that tend to skew towards wanting to get an education or higher education, which is great. Actually, black women graduate from high school at a higher rate than white people, than all of white people. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good. But the value of college is decreasing. That's a big issue with black Americans right now, because the value of college is decreasing because tuition is getting more expensive and you're getting less out of it than you were before.
Right.
So I think eventually you have to make some behavioral decisions. You have to be like, I don't really want to take out all of this debt to get a 4-year degree,
Right, and that's a whole separate sub issue of the student loans and stuff like that, and the ease of availability and the kind of mess that goes along with those. That's I'm not a big fan of free college either. It devalues the actual education you get there, and then to me it just gives the K through 12 an excuse to graduate less smart kids. I don't understand why we can't graduate kids from high school that can go do things. You have to go to college. You need that. And to me, all it is, and even my degree for that matter, all it is a resume point. It's not actually, doesn't say anything about me. It's just a resume point, and then that gets them, if you're a hiring manager, you got 400 applications. Well, 300 of them don't have college degrees. So, well, those 300 out. It's not that those 300 weren't capable of the job. It's just an easier way to narrow a hiring field down than I think it is anything about what you're doing. There are some degrees out there that have some real value as far as, like a doctor who knows how to cut people open. That's kind of important. But for a lot of jobs out there, we lean on college to really just to narrow the field of candidates for an employer. That never made sense to me.
Well, it doesn't make sense to me either. Really, not every American should go to college. They really shouldn't.
Right. I think we need to. I don't understand why we can't graduate kids from high school that aren't stupid. That's what I don't. That's my take on it. Not that I was the brightest ever.
You could. It used to be if you got a high school diploma, that signaled to employers that you were ready to work. And now the goalposts have shifted. Now employers are looking at, well, you need a college degree to do all of these things. But a college degree is increasingly not signifying your competence. It's a screwed up business. It really is.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think getting into, I don't know, it kind of goes both ways too, in that we have a void of lower education level jobs in this country as well. Like, we don't have a lower middle class career set like we used to back in the 50s and 60s and stuff like that. Like, all the offshoring and different stuff like that. I don't know that we have so many jobs that need either high level education or zero level education, and there's nothing in the middle. And there's not nothing, but not much in the middle anymore as far as jobs available. That's another issue in my interpretation of what I see on this particular subset. Okay, so let's talk specifically a little bit about the book, An Inconvenient Minority. This was a big story for a second. There's too many other things that kind of overflew it, but I remember hearing about it's the student fairness. I can't remember the acronym, versus Harvard, which was basically so did it, like, as I remember the video of the cookie sales, was that that was part of that, right? Where the guys were selling cookies and they were charging as an example of it because they were trying to illustrate the point.
They sold them for $1 to white people and 75 cents for black people, and they sold it for $1.25 to Asian people. Yeah.
Okay. Funny. Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a good illustration. It kind of made the point. So, I don't know. Again, where did you get to writing this book? Was there something specific? Was it kind of, it just made sense to you to go ahead and chase this book down, or was it something specifically personal to you that got you going on this book?
Well, uh, I obviously thought the case was really interesting. I don't write books unless something really, really captures me. And then one of the things that I was interested in was the sympathy divide. Everybody always cares. People care about victims. Um, they're inherently empathetic towards victims. Um, Being a victim gains you social currency. If you're a kid, you can play a victim pretty easily. Now, if you're a certain racial minority, you can play victim a lot easier than if you're another race. You know, um, if you're black or if you're Latino, colleges tend to treat you like a victim, and they tend to make their curriculum around your supposed victimhood. But if you're Asian, colleges don't treat you like a victim. They actually treat you like an oppressor, ironically, um, which is which is bad for implications because of this, because of the following. Because when a college gives you the ability, or when a college bestows upon somebody oppressor status and a college bestows upon another group victim status, then they can make it harder for the oppressor to get admissions and get benefits and get scholarships. Uh, and they can make it easier for the victim to get scholarships and benefits and admissions and stuff. That's what Harvard's doing. It's like an emblem for what's going on in our culture. It's like the Asians are being treated worse than the whites, who are being treated worse than the Hispanics, who are being treated worse than Black Americans. And that's kind of what's going on. In fact, that is what's going on.
And so that turned into, this is, as a journalist, this is a story, but it's too big of a story to write in a couple of column inches. This needs to be a full book.
Yeah, because I talk about a lot of things in this book. I talk about meritocracy. So people are skeptical of meritocracy. Why are people skeptical of meritocracy? Because they don't know, because we don't agree on what makes a person meritorious for college. Um, but I'm a defender of meritocracy. I defend meritocracy because we kind of do know what makes a person successful at college. They need to be smart. They need to be somewhat motivated. They need to be well prepared. They need to be disciplined. If you're not, you shouldn't go to college. You should go to a different school. You should go to a different kind of program. And I believe that people should be treated on their merits. So I actually spend a lot of time in my book kind of defending that against a lot of criticisms, and then showing, of course, how Asian Americans, um, like why they value meritocracy and why it's, of course, being destroyed in our culture today.
Okay, so what are some of those criticisms that you were pushing back on?
Well, one criticism that I get for meritocracy is that it privileges rich people, because rich people can kind of play the game of meritocracy better than poor people can. Do you kind of understand what I mean there?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's the
Like rich people can hire tutors,
right.
and the tutors can make people smarter and stuff like that, and then that kind of spirals, and it gives the rich like an even stronger advantage and stuff like that. That's a common criticism that I hear about meritocracy. And the reality is that wealth does not necessarily have a link to does not have as strong of a link to individual intelligence and merit that you might think, um, because sure, rich people can do that, but oftentimes rich people get lazy over generations. Wealth actually makes people lazier. And so over a few generations, you actually have poor, hungry immigrant families who actually get higher SAT scores, like Asian Americans do, than rich white people. And I believe, of course, in building opportunity. So I think that if you want your child to be to be smart, I think the government has a role of providing your child like a strong education, providing your child extracurricular opportunities that you can take, and everything like that. But I think the opportunities are there, and that being rich doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to stay more intelligent.
Because one of the things here locally that is like a specific weirdism in that kind of framework is like the way we fund schools locally inside the school district is based upon how inversely based upon how affluent the neighborhood the school works, the school fee that the school is fed from, um, is. So, for example, in the higher, richer end part of town, whatever you want to say, that school gets less funding per student than the low income portion of town. Mainly because the school system knows that a parent-teacher association in the affluent part of towns can make up some of the difference where there is not much of, if any, parent-teacher association in some of the lower income portions of town. And so the inference, at least from that, is that the money does make a difference.
Okay, so now this is where the discussion gets juicy. Um, so when people say that rich districts tend to have better funded schools, first of all, most of the time what they're talking about is not that the government funds the students more per capita. Actually, the
Right, it's
local
the
governments
inverse.
normally
Right.
normally they actually fund lower income students more per capita than they fund higher income students.
Right. That is accurate to
Because
my understanding of our county school system here.
yeah, and it's equity funding. It's called equity. They fund the lower income more than they fund the higher income. But the reason why the richer schools ultimately get funded more is because privately the richer parents fund or make up for the difference and then some. And that's why on per capita the kids get funded more. And so that raises a question. Well, does a person have a right to fund a school more? Because, and unfortunately or fortunately, they do. They do have a right. You can put your money wherever you want, and your money, if you believe that your money is helping your community, then you're allowed to put your money to help your own community. If you try to force a person to fund schools that are not associated with their kid or not associated with their community, then they're probably going to be less likely to fund those kinds of schools. So then the question is, well, is that fair? Well, you can say it's not fair, but then you can say that the solution is, well, you should, if you really want to go to a better funded school, you should just move your kid from your house in your worse funded community to that better funded community, and then you can get into a better funded school. But the thing is, a lot of parents don't do that. They don't do that not because they're not concerned about their kid, but because they value their own community. So there's a lot of things that are going on here, and it's more complicated than just saying, oh, rich people are funding rich schools and poor people are being left out. It's more than that.
Right. I agree that it's more complicated for sure.
Yeah.
Because again, that was one of those things. It's like, because even on a more complicated, bigger scale, we do it statewide as well. Knox County, for example, gets less funding per student than some of the smaller counties in the state, to kind of same kind of process to try to make up that difference, because Knox County has the population and stuff to raise more in taxes and could pay for it. And that's a big separate fight in the trying to equalize school things. Because again, one of the things that confuses me is this idea that all the schools should be equal across the state, at least, or even within the county, that there shouldn't be a unique differences because of the communities, because of the neighborhoods and stuff like that on how schools work. Now, the funding thing's a little bit separate, but the idea that a Memphis kid needs to have the exact same education as a Knoxville kid doesn't make sense to me, because there's different things that go on. Like, what I guess the better way to say it, this is a recurring question of mine, is like, what is the point of public schools? What are we trying to achieve? Is there a need to achieve a universal same level for all students in every school in the entire state or in the entire country? Is that, like, what value does that have for the student? Because to me, the more you try to level that out, the lower the total level is going to be. Okay. And so how do we justify that logic, I guess, is what I'm after.
So people think public school has been around forever. It hasn't. Public school was created basically in like 1900 or 1910. It's been around for like 100 years. It basically was an experiment. So people think that public school is just here forever. It's actually not here forever. And in the 21st century, there's evidence to suggest that the way that we think about public school is probably going to dissipate, and it's probably going to be replaced by some kind of school choice, some kind of highly individualized school preferences where you can send your kid to this school, or you can send your kid to this art school, or you can homeschool your kids because homeschooling is easier than ever. You can, I think it's going to be replaced. I think the public school as we know it is going to be replaced. Now, what's the purpose of public school initially? The purpose of public school initially was to get everybody to a baseline level, And, some kids will go dramatically beyond that baseline level. And then that raises a question. Well, what do we do with those kids? What do we do with those kids? And that's when the idea of gifted and talented programs were created. Now you have gifted and talented programs on there. But now people get jealous because there's some kids who are in gifted and talented programs and their own kid isn't in a gifted and talented program. And every parent believes their kid is gifted, believe me. So now they get jealous and they're like, well, why are you putting this kid ahead? And my kid's left behind. So, you start to get the whole idea of public school is starting to begin to unravel. It's unraveling right now.
Right. Because was it Austrian style or whatever? I can't remember the term on it, but it's basically, it's to get kids smart enough to read the instruction manual for the job, but not smart enough to actually understand the complexity of the job to see if there's anything that should be done better or that they could do better. It's just to get grindhouse workers, kids that can go out and do the grind jobs, the manual labor jobs, and then that's it. And then past that, it's just been more complex and more complex, as you mentioned, and at least are implying that it's going to start falling apart. Because again, that's one of those things that we talk about a lot as parents, as friends, and stuff like that, and different people I talk to on the show, is the importance of education. But like, I can't get anybody to answer that kind of question of like, what is the goal? What are we trying to do? And is this format getting us there? Because, like a buddy of mine spent a couple of years in Germany, and then in Germany, it's like 10th grade or maybe even 9th grade, you kind of shift into a more designed path. They have a baseline through what we would call middle school, and then after that, what we would call high school is more like a college kind of style thing, where it's, you're going into a higher learning, maybe a professional style lawyer, doctor kind of career, or you're going to go into the trades or something like that. And they shifted off much lower because they already hit that baseline in middle school, which I think is probably pretty normal for just kind of the standard run of a youth, for lack of a better word. And so again, that's another thing that I'm super, super interested in. And so I'm trying to think if I missed anything that I wanted out of this, as far as the critical race theory part, because we kind of came off of that and we've kind of been going back and forth, which is fine. I'm totally good with wandering through topics for the show's sake. And, but we're getting on the end of the hour here, and I want to make sure I didn't skip anything I was specifically after. Is there anything that you can think of that you want to throw out for us so we can maybe fill a gap that we might have left out? I'm not seeing anything that I've missed so far, but is there anything that you think we might have kind of breezed over that needs a little bit more time?
First of all, your listeners can get my book, An Inconvenient Minority.
Oh, I was going to save the plug section for later, but there you go. Ahead, plug it out.
Okay. Yeah. It's coming out July 13th. Call your local indie bound. Go to indiebound.org and request a copy for your local indie bookstore. You can also buy it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everything like that. But I'm just encouraging people to support their local bookstores.
Cool.
Let's see. Critical race theory. I think we had an interesting initial discussion about whether critical race theory is actually being taught in schools.
Okay.
And that's why I asked you the question about, you should go to your fourth grader and listen to what he's saying, because I have a fifth grade sister. I have a sister in fifth grade. And I talk with her a lot. I'm much older than her, and I have the benefit of being able to talk with my fifth grade sister. And, I remember we were talking one day, and I was actually talking to her about my book, which is kind of an advanced concept
right
for a fifth grader, but she comprehended it. And she was like, yeah, I understand. But then she started saying things like, yeah, like, it's bad when, you know, or it's bad that people are getting shot just because of their race. You know, I think she said that, and I'm like, where did you learn that? I mean, maybe when we put on our news in our household, but she had like she had the whole thing down. You know, she had the whole narrative down, and of course, people are not usually killed just because of their race. They're usually killed because of a lot of different things, including the fact that uh, usually 83% of the people shot by police are carrying a weapon. Um, and usually vast majority of them are threatening the police or threatening somebody around the policeman. And actually black Americans are killed at a lower rate than in terms of their ratio of violent crime in the United States are. But regardless of all of that, you know, she seemed to say the narrative about what's being said in our culture pretty, you know, on the dot. And I was like, well, where'd you learn that? And she was like, oh, you know, I was talking to my friends, talking to my teachers, and I was like, well, it's there's stuff being taught, you know, there really is, you know, and it may not be, you know, critical race theory. They may not say it's critical race theory, but this is why you need to question your kids. You really need to talk to them about this stuff.
Okay, because I get as we're discussing it, I'm concerned that both parties are telling the truth here, in that critical race theory, as you air quoted accurately, he air quoted it when he said it. Everybody, for those not watching, you know, air quotes, critical race theory is not being taught in the school systems. That is, could functionally be a true statement, but the effects or something like that, for lack of a better word, of the narrative, as you mentioned, is, and so it's the gray area where both parties are telling the truth, and which, you know, doesn't surprise me. The more I get into politics, the more I understand how, if you could say two people could say the opposite thing and both be telling the truth if you word it correctly. And so that is for me, that is an interesting insight that I'm going to have to put a little bit more time and effort into picking apart to see if I understand it correctly. We have a whole separate issue with the way our law was written terribly, so it's probably going to get tossed anyway. So we'll see if it gets revisited in the future as far as the legal speak of it here in the state. I don't know, anything completely off topic. I wanted to get about 5 more minutes out of you, but we can call it a show, whatever you want to do. I'm here to have a good time.
Where are you in Tennessee?
Knoxville.
Knoxville. Did you go to UT?
I did.
What did you study?
Business logistics.
Business logistics. And you feel like it was just like a resume thing?
I don't know. I part of that was me. I mean, we were talking about behaviors and stuff earlier.
Yeah.
To ironically put a word in, I was privileged enough that I didn't have to pay for school. My parents sent me. And like, it was just one of those, it was a given. And I think part of that for me I took it for granted. It was like, I didn't try. I didn't put a lot of effort into it. I got in and I got out, and, you know, and not a brag, but for the most part as a student, I just didn't put a lot of effort in and did okay through lower education, at least. You know, I think I graduated high school with like a 3.4 or something like that. I never put in more than, you know, a couple of cram hours in before finals or something like that, and that didn't work as well in college. But I still got through college without a lot of effort. You know, and so for me, functionally, work-wise, I've never really done anything specifically with a degree. I won't say I didn't learn anything there, but as far as career-wise, it didn't do much for me, other than maybe, you know, get me into the second tier of conversation because they threw out all the ones that didn't have a college degree. I'd say that's probably about it. But you know, it's a good time. I enjoyed my time there. I met my wife there.
Sure.
I was a band dork. I love the band. Marching band's the best thing that ever happened to me.
That makes it worth it.
Yeah, and so I mean, no, it does't. I mean, I kind of feel guilty for how much my parents spent on it, but it was back, you know, it was back 20 years ago now, when it didn't cost a $30,000 a year or whatever it's for school. I don't know what UT's tuition is nowadays, but that conversation about what, like the obligation of college, which I've been pleasantly surprised. There's a lot of talk about getting trade schools as a priority, and like this standard stance of you go to college, that's what you do after you graduate high school, is starting to fall apart. Yeah. And I think that's a good thing for this next generation of people. Because again, like, going back to what I said earlier, I think there's I need to get some economists on here to talk about, but like, I don't understand. Like, again, I got a fourth and a rising fifth grader and a rising third grader, and me and the missus talk all the time about, like, what are they going to do for a living? Like, what are the jobs actually going to be 10, 15 years from now? Because like I said, I think like it's either bottom of the barrel or something that's pretty high up there. There's no middle ground anymore. You don't have a chance to kind of flounder a little bit as a young adult. You've got to be, chasing that career path down from the jump, or you're going to be a decade behind. And it's hard to raise a family when you're a decade behind in income and all the other different things. And so that's one of the things that I'm really curious about, it kind of looking to the future. Because again, it goes back to that education question. What are we teaching our kids? Are we teaching our kids stuff that has zero value 15 years down the road?
Yeah, I get it. But at the same time, the average age of an electrician is 58.
Right. And that's why the trade school things become important.
There are opportunities for young people, but they're not necessarily in the traditional college route. Right.
The actual labor jobs are there, and that's been, I actually teased the idea about going and learning HVAC so I could make twice the income I make right now fixing air conditioners, but it's hot outside right now, and I don't want to be outside fixing somebody's air conditioner in it. But I'm fortunate in where I've kind of come out in this whole dance. I own a business or two, and they're doing well, and so I can do this for fun, and maybe one day I'll start making money off of this too. But really, this is just me exploring, and hopefully some people exploring with me learn something along the ways, and have a good time with it. So, well, I really appreciate you taking the time. And if you want to hang out, I got a little outro to do, and we can chat a second after I get the outro done. But anyway, replug everything real quick, and then I'll do the outro.
An Inconvenient Minority. Buy it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, IndieBound. Coming out July 13th. Pre-order it now. The Attack on Asian American Excellence. The Fight for Meritocracy, if you're interested in meritocracy. And American, how people really achieve in America and how people lose that and how the elite thinks about that, then you should buy my book.
Cool. I will link that in the show description for everybody. And Kenny, thank you very much. It's outro time. All right, Kenny's here, everybody. Like I said, we're trying to explore and understand the two sides of this big critical race theory argument. So I took the opportunity to do so. So we're Almost in Agreement @gmail.com, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Go to our website, almostinagreement.com. Check us out there. Or get all the episodes on your favorite podcast provider. While you're at these places, please like, share, friends, subscribe, whatever it is, to help us grow a little more audience. Fourth Creek Brewers Fest is July 10th at 2 p.m. As many Knox County, Knoxville brewers that we can get are going to be in there, and they're going to be doing their thing. If you don't have the opportunity, the time, the chance, or whatever to get to some of these different breweries around town, it'll be one place to get everybody together at the same time. Go to ebayblounchknox.com/brewfest to check out more about that. We appreciate everybody for listening today. We'll be back in a couple days with another show. Have a great one.